Last Pine Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content, including 2 film geeks who actually liked The Last Jedi. Sorry, fellow nerds, subversion of expectations stings. Listener discretion is advised.
Wow, cool! They're not gonna show that stupid-ass Godzilla movie again, are they?
No, Kyle. These are independent films.
Oh, like Independence Day? That sucked ass too. Nah, dude, independent films are those black and white hippie movies. They're always about gay cowboys eating pudding.
No, they're not. Independent films are produced outside the Hollywood system. They're movies without all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood.
You show me one independent film that isn't about gay cowboys eating pudding.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me. I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello, and welcome back to the New Way podcast. After we've had a couple little hiccup hiatuses over the time, the last couple months here, as we sort of begin emerging from the COVID-19 chrysalis. But this
emerging from our caves.
That's right. Amazingly enough, this is the first episode that Ben and I have been recording in the same room together since March 4th.
Oh, hi, Matt.
Of this year. Oh, hello, Ben. We're still sort of looking at each other on screens just because I couldn't like not see Ben on his screen. It just didn't feel right anymore.
Yeah.
Without. So I now actually have this amazing shot of Ben's legs.
I caught. We had eye contact for just a moment, and we felt uncomfortable and had to look away and go back to our technology.
I literally, it is the funniest camera. I really wish you could all see this, but we're not recording this. But the Ben angle on this is completely the Basic Instinct leg crossing shot, and it's going to make me laugh. Probably
you're going to realize at one point you're going to look at that screen and my balls are going to be hanging out.
I
right?
think it already happened. Yeah, this is not only the first time Ben and I have recorded since March. It's the first time I've seen Ben not through
in person.
A doorbell camera or Zoom, which is
we've been in the same vicinity a couple of times. We've waved at each other from a distance.
This is true. Yeah, that's about as close as we have gotten. But I'm slowly emerging back into the world a little bit. Still not going the crazy Florida route of like, hey, let's just pretend nothing's going on.
Hey, Matt, Due South Oktoberfest is this weekend. I just say let's just go, get a bar spot and just drink every beer on the menu. It's
so like that is one of the really difficult things for me to get used to is like I'm not going to be at a beer fest I don't even know when I would feel comfortable at a beer fest. And such a thing I miss.
Ironically, I think that my next beer fest was probably going to be the last beer fest I went to, which is Three Sons Lumberjack Day, which is in February.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm assuming by February that it's going to be small enough that, I actually went to Three Sons. I've gone there to pick up beer and stuff, but I actually went inside recently, and they did a pretty good job of like making sure everybody stays the fuck away from one another. So I do think good businesses are adapting, but I've still gone out somewhere to like eat or drink anything like 4 times.
Yeah.
And I've been super careful every time I have. I've gone at very low volume times. Like I went to Copper Point at like 3:30 in the afternoon on a Monday.
That's a good time to go.
Well, there was nobody there. I just went in there and I had 3 beers and left.
It's awesome.
But yeah, that was nice. That was like the first time I had gone to like a brewery. Actually, the only time besides that time I went to Three Sons. But yeah, it's interesting. But hey, I mean, we have friends down here that go out and fucking rage on the weekends. So
yeah, that's really what freaks me out is I'm not really worried about if everyone just like kind of did what they were supposed to do and people went back to things and they were like just being responsible about it, I would not have much of an I'm not freaking out in this room right now because I know that you've been like careful about things. And like even today I did the most. I mean, I was out more than I've been probably in a long time because I had to take my car up to Bremen to get like the scheduled service done on it, and I had to like sit in a waiting room and talk to people there, and like it's strange for me still because I've just been doing so little of any of that during all of this, so it's like of course I'm still in that like, oh, that person's mask is not over their nose, or like that person's too close to me.
Did you watch the pandemic special last night?
I have not yet.
Oh.
I'm super excited for it though.
Hey, what you? Where it's they call them chin diapers.
Oh god!
So it's just where they wear on the chin and they don't cover their nose or mouth at all. And there are people that like man, South Park always gets it right. I'm actually like incredibly excited to probably watch that tonight. I don't want to spoil too much for you, but there's a point in it where all of the teachers have quit because they're fearful for COVID, even though the governor or whatever has told them all the kids they have to go back to school. So they replace all the teachers with police officers. And then of course, then the police officers get into an altercation where they shoot Token.
Oh god. Oh god.
It's great. It's so smart.
Yeah, there are certain things we need during dark times, and Trey Parker and Matt Stone are two of those things we absolutely must have. I will say,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I will say there's one other thing I was very grateful, and honestly, I think it was part of like what pulled me out of like, I wouldn't say I was in a complete funk, but I was definitely in a like. The COVID thing had just been going on for far too long, and I wasn't seeing people and all this stuff. And so one of the things that, as I've been like over the last couple of months of like getting my shit together, was a recommendation from both you and my brother and your wife, which everyone I think at this point probably has started to watch or has seen because you will watch it so quickly, which is Cobra Kai. And I had heard things even when it was on YouTube.
Ironically, I actually watched the first. So when it first came out on YouTube, it was marketed as like, oh, get YouTube Red because you can watch, Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
But for the first 3 days, Cobra Kai was available for free. So like when it was released, so I got through 4 episodes in 3 days. I was watching them at lunch, and then I think the third day I was just like in the afternoon. It was like 4:00, and I had like an hour left of work, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna sneak in that last episode or whatever. So I got like 4 of 10, and then the next day it was like, nope, switch to YouTube Red to watch the rest of the episodes. So
how dare they?
So anyways, I got like a little bit into it and was like, oh yeah, it's actually way better than it has to be, and I was only 4 episodes into the first season. But never followed up on it after that. And it was so funny when I realized it was on Netflix, and I was just like, oh God, Beth is going to fall in love with this show. And of course she did. She thinks it's like the greatest thing of all time. So is Luke Stevens, actually.
Yeah. No, what I'm most impressed with it is that it hits everyone across the board one way or another. Like my brother loves it. You and your wife love it. I love it. Luke loves it. Brian Nader on it. Like, almost everyone I know unanimously just like is absolutely into this show, and for good reason. It is so close to a parody without actually tipped. It walks on that line. It very occasionally will just go over it just a
intentionally
little bit.
So
yeah,
obviously
absolutely
intentionally,
but then there's always an earnest kind of backbone to it, which really is not a lot of things can pull off those two, that combination. And they've done it for 2 seasons pretty spectacularly, I would say. I think it looks like they're heading into that same territory with the next season from the little bit I've heard about it. I won't spoil anything, but there's a couple of plot points that if you've watched any of the movies, we're heading into Karate Kid 2 territory, I think here. And then eventually we'll probably come back. We did Karate Kid 1 and 3 in seasons 1 and 2 of the show, and I think we're going to head into that second Karate Kid, which should be super interesting.
Nice.
So yeah, Cobra Kai is great. Another really interesting thing for you guys to watch right now if you're not watching it, because I keep saying this to Ben every week, and then I've also been like sending a text to my brother, which is Lovecraft Country is a TV show on HBO that's it's produced by J.J. Abrams and Jordan Peele are 2 of the people behind it. I think there's some other creative folks behind it, but it is literally one of the only TV series that I've ever seen that it has a different genre like beginning to end every episode. Like every single episode you go into, all of a sudden is it's the same story. The story is still happening all in the same universe, but it's completely skipped to a new genre. Like even though it's the same story, which is I've never really
it's like
I can't think of anything
now,
that's
here's our horror episode.
Yeah.
Here's our fantasy episode. Here's our sci-fi episode.
our Indiana
Here's
Jones
here's our
adventure episode.
I really do think that there's going to be an episode that's just like a straight up uproarious comedy. Yeah. I mean, it's
that's got to be. I can't imagine that they're not going to keep the conceit going. We're like 7 episodes in or something, and it's like it's gone through from Cronenberg-esque, body mutilations and stuff. It's a really crazy series. I can't say that like everything lands necessarily, but
it's uneven for sure. And there are some episodes that are better than others, but it's almost worth watching just because it's so audacious.
Yeah, I'm super impressed. Well, and it makes sense that not every episode's going to land because it's a different genre. Like not everyone loves every genre and is successful in every genre.
Yeah, ironically, like I thought that I think it was episode 2, which was like the straight horror episode, was actually one of the weaker episodes, which seems weird for the show Lovecraft Country. It seems like it would set itself up pretty well. But like this past week's episode, which was a hard sci-fi sort of time jumping, weird, Looper-esque sort of, strange. But it was great and really interesting and fun and like definitely expands upon a character. But the craziest part is apparently all of this shit happens in the book. So that in and of itself
want to
is
see
kind of
I
incredible.
mean, that's got to be a really wild thing to read, to just be kind of like, it's very Dark Tower-esque of like, you're reading this one thing and then all of a sudden
it changes.
Into a brand new thing.
It's like, oh, it's this hard sci-fi. No, now it's a Western. It's just a straight Western. It's a love story. Okay, well, now it's it's like a, fantastical fantasy, multiple multiverse,
And speaking of multiverse, actually, I have not talked to you about this, and I didn't tell you to prep anything to talk about this, but I am curious, and there may be some spoilers here if you guys have not seen it, because I know you watched this last year. You watched his Dark Materials. Did you finish the whole season, or no?
I think that we got to 2 more episodes, and I think they're still on our DVR.
Okay, because I was cleaning out my DVR and I had recorded.
I really liked it because the production value was so high and the acting was really good.
It's really well cast. I liked the story. I thought it was really compelling. And one thing was really interesting. And if you've gotten just a couple episodes in, there's a review, and I was reading a lot about the show after I finished that first season on Reddit and some of the message boards, because I was curious how close it was to these books. Because I've also bought the books because I was interested in reading a new series. And so the spoiler alert,
you fucking atheist.
I know. Spoiler alert, you read this book, and in the TV show they do it very differently, but in the book you're reading this thing where you're in like this kind of alternate England, and it's like they're in Zeppelins and sort of like primitive things, but some things are futuristic.
Some
but
animals talk.
Some animals, there's all these different things.
Everybody has a demon.
Yeah, everyone's demon personality is this animal that's the opposite sex from them, and the animal can change until they go through puberty. There's all this stuff. And so apparently that's the first book is all told from the girl's point of view. There's nothing that happens outside of it. So the second book you read, they introduce you to a brand new character, and you realize, our world also exists in this story, and it's going to be a huge part of it, which in the TV series they blow right out of the gate.
Yeah, they jump right into it.
Like, it's the second episode, they go right into it, and I'll be honest, I was kind of bummed. Like, I think that would have been so much fun to go through a series, and even if they just put it at the end of the first series.
That's kind of the fun of the Dark Tower, is you don't realize until basically, the drawing of the 3, that all of a sudden it's just like, oh shit, like the real world actually exists in the Gunslinger's world, and that's insane.
Yeah, and I like those kind of reveals, and I think I understand sort of why I read from the creators of the show why they did that, because they felt that it was too jarring for a show to introduce you to this brand new character that's like a huge part of the story in the second season, and blah 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 blah. But I still was like, I would have much rather had that reveal be that would have been my tease at the very end of the episode, is I would have introduced that character the same way they do in the show, And then that would be like my cut for season, then season 2. Then you can also helps you to advertise at that point because you can't like advertise. Oh, here's Earth like cars all of a sudden for out of nowhere. But
Yeah.
So I kind of pitched a last minute topic to Ben this week based on a little bit of news that came across in the movie world. And it's
What are we going to call this episode, Matt?
I literally, the first thing I wrote in my notes is, haven't decided what to name this episode yet. Which I have little filmmakers gone big, indie to mainstream.
No, I would say, how about
Little Big Man?
Auteur Schmator. I don't know.
I don't know. I couldn't come up with the concept, but basically
Big budget auteur.
Yeah, like little gone big, little thing gets big. No, wait, that's not going to do well for us. Yeah, growers, not showers. We'll work on the TBD on the title for this one. But yeah, so across the news, movie news this week was announced that Barry Jenkins, who Ben and Nick went to film school with, director of Moonlight. Best Picture winner Moonlight, and Beale Street,
and he it was funny. It was interesting timing because apparently he just wrapped on Sunday. Underground Railroad.
Oh wow,
the mini series or limited series.
That's right. I remember he's mentioning that. But yeah, he just
he shot for like 113 days or something like that.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's a 10 episode.
Oh okay.
It's a 10 episode limited series with it's going to be big.
That's exciting.
I think it's for HBO. So.
Well, yeah, especially because what he got tapped to direct is the sequel, the live action sequel to the live action.
Prequel.
Oh, prequel.
It's a prequel.
I did not catch that.
Yes.
So we're doing Young Mufasa.
Young Mufasa.
Oh boy. So he is the prequel to the Lion King live action movie, which Ben famously loved. You can listen back on a few of our episodes where he espoused his great interest and love of Jon Favreau and the Lion King live action.
I just railed on the Lion King. I didn't rail on Favreau that much. I love Jon Favreau.
He got a couple punches in there, but
I love Jon Favreau.
But yeah, so it was kind of interesting, and I said, I'm always fascinated when studios tap these kind of indie. Sometimes they're indie darlings, which you could probably argue even after just 2 movies, Barry probably falls into that. But sometimes they've shot one movie, it's maybe been shown at a festival at that point, and then one of the big studios is just like, you know what, something about that we saw resonates with us. Well, there's 2 theories. Something we saw resonates with us, and we want this person to direct our next big, studio movie. Or it sounds like this person might listen to every note that we give them and do exactly what we tell them, and not fight us too much and try to do a movie that we don't want them to do, which is an interesting take as well.
Well, so it's, to me, I think that it's happened. It really has happened for a long time. Ultimately, if you look at like early Hollywood, most directors would start working somewhere else on set. They would start as designers, or they would start or whatever, and then they would just pitch ideas, and then they would get themselves into a writer's room, or basically, at that point, it was more about learning the craft and learning about like how to actually do it, because you kind of had to understand, the physics of filmmaking. But then I think when you had that sort of, l'enfant terrible influx in the 60s after the French New Wave, and all of these film school students started coming out, I think that there was kind of this feeling of directors making lower budget, smaller films, that get recognition, and then all of a sudden the studio is like, no, take more money, do a bigger project. The only difference between then and now is that then they were studio movies, and now they're completely independent film. And so you have these directors that are basically, making an independent film for nickels on the dollar, and then they're getting studio clout behind them to make some sort of tent pole. It's just a much bigger jump.
Sure. Yeah, and it's there's a lot on the line, which is kind of the really interesting thing for a lot of these studios is there's a lot riding, and some of the things some of the ones we go over, sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't work so well. Sometimes it works well financially, but there's maybe a disconnect from enjoyment of the movies. It's really interesting to see how a lot of these ones go. And I had a little trouble with my list because same as you're talking about, Ben, is it's hard to separate like someone that just worked their way up the ranks and eventually just, they made like 2 or 3 indie movies and they got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, or they maybe never even hit it huge, but they're a known commodity. Like, and one that popped into my head that I didn't really know how to define them was Spike Jonze.
Sure.
And Spike Jonze, I can't really say was ever like the closest he got to being offered a huge movie was Wild, where the Wild Things Are. I was almost going to call it Wild Things, which is a very different movie and not at all directed by Spike Jonze.
Yes.
But also, weirdly enough, is going to come up in another one of our podcasts very soon. I literally just did a bunch of work on this for a podcast we have not recorded yet. So TBD. Stay tuned.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, like I think that Spike Jonze is a little bit of an aberration because Spike Jonze has been, for the most part, I mean, Spike Jonze was involved with like Jackass and was a producer on a bunch of stuff. And then had the chance to start directing, but he kind of fell into and has sort of stayed in that kind of small mid-major market.
Yeah.
Where it's like audacious enough scripts or weird enough scripts that they're sort of counterculture, but they've still got studio money behind them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the Charlie Kaufman model to almost to a T. And so, yeah, I think that he's an interesting one, and I think that he would qualify if, for example, like say Being John Malkovich had been like a complete independent film and had been shot, avant-garde, and John Malkovich didn't actually know he was being filmed.
I was going to say if they shot it like Bowfinger,
yeah,
and it was just that Malkovich had no idea there was a movie happening around him, which would be amazing.
Yeah, and then I think that there are also some directors that I think still kind of fall into the category, and I'll go ahead and mention one that's where you see a trajectory that's just kind of more a linear kind of straight up, which is somebody like a Rian Johnson. So like Rian Johnson does Brick, which is, again, a completely independent, very small budget film about $1.5 million, I think is what that movie was financed for, which is still pretty significant for a short, for a short independent film. But you think about, I mean, they had to spend most of that budget on their actors because Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Lucas Haas, I mean, a lot of those guys were still names. Like, I mean, they were names, they were recognizable actors, that they could populate their movie with. And so I don't know exactly what everybody got paid to do that, movie, but then you see he does Brothers Bloom right after that, which is a slightly bigger budget, like an $8 million movie with bigger actors with Adrian Brody and Mark Ruffalo. Then he does Looper, which is a $40 million science fiction movie. And then he does Star Wars.
Yeah.
So, and then of course he comes back to the $30 million movie with Knives Out, and does a smaller, but still, I mean, Knives Out was a movie that if he had made it 15 years ago, Knives Out would have been made for $2 million. Yeah,
with not nearly that cast.
With not nearly that cast, and probably not nearly that production design or look or any. Although it's interesting because his cinematographer has worked with him literally on every movie.
Yeah. Well, and also let's just take just a half a second on Knives Out to talk about. A lot of people, many people, I am not one of them, did not like The Last Jedi, and it really has polarized and kind of like fucked Star Wars fandom worse than almost even in the prequels. It's one of the weirder things I've ever seen in my life. Just watch people turn on it, and I gotta really respect Rian Johnson for picking the perfect follow up to that movie to like literally like no matter if you liked what happened in Last Jedi or didn't, he erased it. Like,
Sure. I mean, like, I think that was the. I mean, you have those people that are just like Ryan Johnson fucked up my childhood. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, well,
Maybe.
yeah, this is the exact same thing that people said about George Lucas in 1999.
I know you can hear buzzing, Ben. I don't think the audience can. It's our usual buzzing.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. It's Ruth Buzzy.
It's Ruth Buzzy sitting right here.
It's all good.
I don't know what triggered it. You like literally shifted in your seat, and then yeah.
Yeah, it's what happens.
It's very weird.
It's perfectly fine. But yeah, I also think that, I mean, that's the type of thing that's kind of therapeutic for a director to do this big divisive thing and then have to be like, okay, I'm going back to my comfort zone, and I'm doing something that's tonally the closest that Knives Out comes to anything he's made is Brick.
Yes.
And so. Or some actually
And
almost
Brothers Bloom.
It's
I'd
almost
say Brothers
it's
Bloom.
almost right between them actually, because it's a mystery, like Brick is a mystery, which to some extent Brothers Bloom is a mystery, but it's got kind of a playful tone like Brothers Bloom does. So I would say tonally it's more like Brothers Bloom, but plot wise it's more like Brick.
Well, it's kind of interesting, and this kind of segs into another filmmaker that fits this list for us as well, because there's this thing that happens, right? You're this small filmmaker. You get tapped to do this big thing. It is either a hit or not a hit. And you can say, The Last Jedi, whether you liked it or didn't like it, it was still a financial success, at the box office. And very similar wise, you have someone like Colin Trevorrow, who directs one movie, Safety Not Guaranteed, with Mark Duplass and Aubrey Plaza, which is a fine little movie.
It's fun.
It's like there's not anything groundbreaking about it, but the studio decides to give him the Lost World Jurassic World. Jurassic World. They didn't send him back in time to direct the Steven Spielberg sequel.
Colin.
So he gets this giant movie, right? And he has by far, I gotta say, one of the really interesting arcs in all of these things. So he gets this huge movie. It is the biggest movie of all time for a period of time. It outgrosses everything. It's huge, right? He follows it up with a movie called The Something Life of Timothy Green.
Yeah, the one with Naomi Watts.
Yeah.
That got completely
and it's
panned.
Apparently very terrible. And at this point, he gets tapped to direct the third Star Wars movie. He is going to direct what eventually became The Rise of Skywalker, that J.J. Abrams did. After this, like The Weird Life of Timothy Green or whatever that shit was called, the studio gets and also Disney had been not having good luck with two other directors that are on my list that were tapped from smaller movies. You've got Chris Miller and Phil Lord were given the Solo movie. They got pushed out. Gareth Edwards, who was given Rogue One, then tossed. But it was okay because Gareth Edwards had already gotten his break with Godzilla, which he got off of just doing Monsters, which is a great tiny little movie. But the circle is very convoluted. So Trevorrow, though, he gets knocked off of the Star Wars thing. And because he had chosen to do Star Wars, he was not available to do the sequel to Jurassic World. So that goes to was it Fede Alvarez that did?
No, it was not
Fede Alvarez. It's I forget who did the sequel.
Bayona. It was Bayona.
Okay. So he's not available for that. So now he's in this terrible limbo, right? He's lost the Star Wars franchise. He has also potentially lost the Jurassic Park franchise. His only other movie has failed. And for whatever reason, Jurassic World decides that they think that he's the one to carry the third part of their movies home, and he gets brought back into the Jurassic World territory. But man, that's a cat with 9 lives, because that normally you have to do what Ryan Johnson's done, because otherwise you turn into Josh Trank, who's another one that was on my list that directed a phenomenally great little movie called Chronicle. And then
Not too little, but
little enough. I mean, found footage.
Trank was also like a very well known like commercial and
He had a bunch of stuff on the small side.
music videos and things along those lines. Like he came from like the Michael Bay school where he was like well known sort of in the industry, and then made a great movie with Chronicle, which had a little bit of studio money behind it. It was made for like $8.5 million, $9 million or something like that
for like one scene.
Yeah, exactly, for one scene at the end of the movie, for the Akira scene.
Yes. But it's interesting, and then he follows it up with a huge flop with Fantastic Four, and what has he done? He did one other one that didn't do well, right?
He just did the Al Capone movie
that went to nothing.
Yeah, people just said it wasn't very good.
It's like it is a really slippery slope, and it's got to be something, and I've asked this to Ben a few times. I don't know if we've ever actually like talked about it on the podcast, but there's kind of this idea of like, all right, so you're this small filmmaker, and you are offered your big break, right? Like you're going to go from Safety Not Guaranteed to Jurassic World, right? From this tiny little movie with pretty much no special effects or anything like that, and now you've got this thing, and I know you've answered this in a couple of ways, but like, what is say it's you, Ben, right? And you've got experience directing just in general as far as your work, your actual job, but somebody being like, hey, all right, Ben, I want you to direct the Dark Tower. Like, I want to bring you on to do the Dark Tower, and
Ron Howard calls me up. And he says,
"Yes." He's like, "Hey, Ben."
He's like,
"Been a long time."
Yeah, it's been a long time. I remember seeing that short. It was really good.
It's really good. I saw some of those educational films. Great work.
Yeah.
Good drone footage. Like the drone footage. How would you like, $150 million to direct a Dark Tower movie?
Well, my first question is, so are we just doing the gunslinger, or is this going to be a procedural or some sort of shit like that?
And in true Ron Howard fashion, he goes, well, we're going to see what happens.
Okay.
And then you're going to be like, I never really liked you.
I like Ron Howard. I just don't like some of his movies, but I like him personally. I think he's a really cool dude. No, I think that you have to say yes, and you have to say yes and kind of stick to your understanding that even if you're kind of, out of the frying pan and into the fire, to for lack of a better term, I think that you have to understand that the pitfalls of navigating that are worse than not taking the chance of navigating it all. So I would say yes, but I would also be guarded as far as what the expectation was, what the, making sure that yes would be with a caveat of like, how much of this is going to be me?
Yeah.
What am I bringing to this? Am I going to be able to fight for structure? Am I going to be able to fight for this? I'm fine with the studio being involved with lots of other stuff that they would know more about. But when it comes down to some of the storytelling aspects, I would want to have at least some sort of creative control. And as long as I was provided that type of leniency, which, to be fair, a lot of studios have provided a more, I think, kind of a wider palette for a lot of these auteur directors, people who are doing these smaller films and then kind of matriculating to larger budgets. And so,
yeah, because that's what I was like. I was wondering how often do you think it is that like, so they say, all right, we're gonna give Ben Wilson his big break here, and he's gonna do this movie. And they just give you a binder on day one that's like the entire movie spelled out, like from the standpoint of like effects studios and from the standpoint of your shooting schedule and to where it's almost like you have a personal assistant that's basically like telling you this is what you do, this is what happens each day, and you're really just you're just following a roadmap to like actually get it done, or do you think there really is a lot more input from that? I'm sure it's different on each one, but
yeah, I mean, it's definitely different for each one. I think that for a lot of these filmmakers, they've if you've directed a film, no matter how big or small it is, you understand the logistics of running a crew, and you understand the logistics of scheduling and budgeting and all of that type of stuff. So I would typically say, I mean, ultimately, when it comes down to it, what a producer's job is, and I would say a producer, for those who don't know, the difference, a lot of people will look at a film and they'll just say, well, that's the director's vision. Well, yeah, that's the idea. But the producers kind of exist to make sure that the director has what they need to bring their vision to life. They're the ones who are like, well, you should hire this guy. You should do this guy. This is the production designer you should get. Listen, we have a company here. If we can get it co-financed by this other company, they're going to give you a little bit more creative freedom than having it entirely financed by Sony. There's all sorts of, people kind of pulling different strings there. And in that case, the producers on the film are usually the ones who are going to be most integral in making sure, or at least in dictating how much control you're going to have over the actual narrative aspects of the film. And so that's what I was saying is like, I would have to be put into a situation where, first off, I mean, like, I would have, it's not like I would need to know what the script is, like I'd have to read the script and be like, oh, okay, can I work with the writer some? Like, here are some things I was thinking about changing. Structurally, I don't like this. Here's some other ideas, that type of thing. I mean, it's a collaborative process. And so, but I'm sure there is. I mean, there's lots of directors for hire. They're directors for hire where the script is done, the studio is ready to make the movie, and they go and they seek out a director to basically do what template has already been put in place for them. The producers have already hired everybody else. Yeah. And all that the directors are really there to do is to sort of bring what their experience to run the set and work with the actors. And that's it. And that's really it. And that does happen. It does happen, not a good bit. It used to happen more, I'd say in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s. Yeah. But now I feel like there's usually directors have a little bit more skin in the game, and they have to kind of be attached to projects in order to. But then again, there are a lot more directors out there nowadays. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think like we can do like a whole thing on this on Marvel. I mean, Marvel has been very involved with the MCU of how they've done it, which is kind of funny because they were doing it, and then Disney kind of tried to like do that as well with Star Wars, and it just didn't. Without Feige, there's something in that mix just wasn't working right, whether it was Kathleen Kennedy or whatever it was. It just didn't quite. They never trusted them, I think, as much as I think Marvel might have. Although famously, you wind up losing Edgar Wright on Ant-Man, and from most accounts on that, it's that basically like he wanted to do a different movie than the studio wanted that fit in their world. And they were just like, no, it deviates too much from our plan. But before we get into the Marvel stuff, I want to go back to two movies. I know that you're very is big on your list, and we've talked about it a couple times. But I kind of want to look at two movies where they were a filmmaker, a filmmaker with a very clear vision and idea gets put in a studio movie, and they do not see eye to eye, and the product winds up being very bad because of it. The first one
is it Babylon AD?
No, but that is actually really great. That's really funny.
That's Matthew Libatique, or not Matthew Libatique. He directed La Haine or whatever, but he was the guy from.
I just remember Ed Burns and poor Gandhi. What's his name in that movie? Am I thinking the right? No, I'm thinking of the butterfly.
No, this is Vin Diesel.
Oh God, yeah, that's a completely different bad one. No, well, the early one I want to go to early, but I mean early-ish, not Ben early, which would be pre-code, but early for most of us, which is David Lynch getting Dune, which is apropos considering we have a new Dune movie coming out soon. But David Lynch's Dune is a mess of a movie, a mess of a director's cut even of the movie. But
there is no director's cut of the movie.
Well, there's no,
there's not. If you actually, David Lynch, the reason why he separated himself so much from that movie is because he put together the initial cut of that movie, which was over 4 hours long. Yeah. And of course, everyone was just like, okay, we're going to cut it down. He thought, he was expecting them to cut it down. He thought they were getting a 185-minute runtime, 3 hours and 5 minutes. And they was like, no, we have to cut it shorter than 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
And so they kicked him out of the edit room, cut it down to less than 2 hours. What came out later was an extended cut, but it was still put together by the studio. It was not put together by
gotcha.
Lynch. Lynch has never touched Dune ever since he got kicked out of the editing studio. The originally,
Which makes sense.
Yeah, there is actually a fan cut of Dune that has like a lot of the deleted scenes, stuff that isn't in the director's cut, but stuff that's been released and that's online, like in various places, that people consider like the best version of Dune, and that everyone loves. You have to like torrent it, to get it, but because it's illegal technically.
Yeah, and it's tough because I remember, we read that book in high school in my junior year. So then I immediately am like, oh, there's a movie of this, and I'm like, oh, and it's directed by David Lynch, and I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan. So I remember putting on the movie with my a buddy or two of mine, and I was just like, what is this? Like I couldn't wrap my head around it, and it's funny because Lynch had 2 opportunities that year when he chose to film Dune. One was Return of the Jedi, and one was Dune. And I can't honestly imagine either of those being satisfying movies from David Lynch, because it's not what I want from Lynch.
Apparently, Lynch was really happy with the end process of Dune. And that's the thing is, I mean, if you look at the production design of that movie, it was really cool. Some of the space effects were bad, especially since the bar had been set so high with Star Wars.
I know, but the look of it's everything looks how it should look, other than Baron Harkonnen with the whole the boils thing was very bizarre.
Yeah.
And Fade Rotha is, I mean, I'm a huge fan of like just the funniness of it, but Sting in his loincloth and the hair and everything is just it's a little rough for me. But yeah, it's interesting, and you think that Lynch is coming off of doing Eraserhead and Elephant Man at that point, right? Those are the only 2
Elephant Man was his that
movies
was the one that gave him the kind of studio cachet.
And it's also really interesting for like I'm also trying to figure out who the executives were that watched those 2 movies that were like, oh, what this guy needs to do next is a space opera fantasy. Like it was
one of the De Laurentiis kids.
Crazy. I mean, they also picked Toto to do the score for it, but it's just a very weird thing. So the other one that was in my head when to talk about this is the one that I thought you would probably want to chime in most about is Alien Resurrection, being directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, which I consider to be another like someone getting a big studio film.
I don't know. Well, so the thing is Jean-Pierre Jeunet was one of the most famous directors in France by the time he had made it. So just because he wasn't popular over here, but Delicatessen and City of Lost Children were like huge hits in France and to some extent over in stateside as well. So I think that's a little bit different. I mean, that's kind of like Baz Luhrmann or after Strictly Ballroom, getting a big budget doing the Romeo and Juliet or something along those lines, where it's like a famous, or even like Guillermo del Toro. I mean, he did Kronos.
Sure.
He did Kronos, and Kronos got him Mimic, and Mimic got him Hellboy 2, and Hellboy, Mimic got him Blade 2, and Blade 2 got him Hellboy, and that was like his progression. And in the midst of that, he shot Devil's Backbone, basically on it with his own money, which was his masterpiece, but it was shot independently in Mexico.
Yeah, well, that's kind of tough, I think, to say like whether or not somebody that's famous in another country is, I mean, especially at that point in time, that's untested property as far as U.S. big movies go. I would say, like, to give somebody that they don't, that's not. It was just it's interesting because I know there were other people that turned down that movie that were also in the same kind of boat that were like not household names. That they're trying to bring in to do something interesting with it, which is funny because they're coming off of Alien. I always call it Alien Cubed because I always hate that they put that thing. But Fincher doing that, and that was another thing that I don't really include it in the same thing as far as like guys getting tapped for big movies. There was a
David Fincher's first movie.
Yeah,
well,
well-
he was just a music video director.
Well, that's the thing. There are a lot of music, like from 95 to like 2010. There was a huge influx of people that had never done anything other than direct a music video that were getting pretty major properties.
Yeah, I mean, like
of
Michael
stuff.
Bay's first movie was Bat Boys, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then it was The Rock after that. So, I mean, I
don't know if we want to say that that's the. I mean, my brothers can be happy to hear that. But
no, I'm just saying, like, those don't count because
Spike Jonze is the same thing,
right? Well, something similar to that.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's exactly what we're talking about here. I'm talking about, like, Gina Prince Blythewood, who directed Love and Basketball, and then did some TV stuff, and then she directed The Old Guard.
Yeah.
With Charlize Theron, the big budget movie for Netflix. And by the way, reason why she got that was because she did the pilot for Cloak and Dagger. Reason why she did the pilot for Cloak and Dagger is because Marvel tried to hire her for Eternals or something like that. And it didn't end up panning out. And so I do think it's interesting that, like, Marvel, she was like an auteur, had directed kind of a few very small movies, like The Secret Life of Bees. Mm-hmm. She directed that and Love and Basketball, these very specific, almost specifically African-American stories. And Marvel, to their credit, brought her in, asked what she was interested in doing. She worked in development on that for a while. And then they said, no, it's not going to work out. So she left, went to DC, shot a pilot, did a good job with the pilot, and then got a job with Netflix, basically making Old Guard. So, that I would consider that kind of type of, like, smaller movie to bigger. Ava DuVernay was a author and documentarian, directed Selma, and then after Selma got the
Wrinkle in Time.
Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Huge budget Wrinkle in Time. Not a great movie. Actually, pretty bad movie. So yeah, I think the best one, I think the most interesting one of all of the ones that I could think of was Jordan Vogt Roberts, who directed Kings of Summer, which was a small, independent comedy that was all about the interplay between the characters. It was definitely just a character.
Some good Nick Offerman in that movie.
Good Nick Offerman in that movie, but a very good, just kind of fun, sort of light, independent comedy. That in his big budget foray, he was offered by the studio because of his take on it was Kong Skull Island. And I cannot think of a bigger dichotomy between movies than Kings of Summer and Kong Skull Island. But you know what? I love both movies.
You know what? So I didn't know that, to be honest. I didn't know that correlation. But Kong Skull Island is a phenomenally good character actor stacked flick.
Sure.
Like, it's literally just every single person in that movie, for the most part, is somebody that's really good at fucking playing character actor roles. And I like a good monster movie populated by that instead of strictly by heartthrobs. And I think that's the difference between, I don't really love Godzilla a whole lot, and I didn't even watch the new Godzilla, although it popped up on HBO recently, and I watched like a scene and a half, and I was like, something about Skull Island just works because every person you meet, even the leads, are kind of just like you've got Tom Hiddleston playing an action lead, and he's not really an action lead guy, so you're like, oh no, he's gonna be playing a character part. And yeah, okay, now we like put him up against Samuel Jackson and John C. Reilly and like everyone that just pops up. You're like, okay,
John
this guy,
Goodman.
Yeah, they're gonna kill it for a scene or two, and that's like, and then become Kong meat and fodder for it. But yeah, that's really interesting. And like I like that idea of going from, okay, he told a really good ensemble comedy, let's throw him on this thing where we really all the studio needs from him at that point, they know what their set pieces are, they know what their their main action beats are. They probably, I imagine at that point when they hire someone like them, they have already cut the trailer in their head.
Believe it or not, so apparently the way it happened with Jordan Vogt Roberts is they hadn't released Godzilla yet, but they were talking about, hey, we're making this. We want to do a monster universe. If Godzilla is really successful, we want to do a Kong movie. We want to do a Godzilla versus Kong movie. We may want to do a Mothra movie. We may want to do like all these things, bring back all of these big monsters or whatever. So here, Jordan Vogt Roberts releases a very successful comedy film, independent comedy film. It does really well on the festival circuit, gets distribution, does well on distribution, goes on video and streaming, does really well on video and streaming. It got him in the door for a pitch. And so he's the one who went in and said, no, we're making a Vietnam movie.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
We're making a Vietnam movie on Skull Island with Kong. And he's the one that pitched the entire movie. Like, he had conceptualized it. And so then he worked with 2 script writers that the studio provided. They turned in a few drafts and revised those, and the studio was like, greenlit, you're good. Like, we got you going. And so, yeah, he basically just used the cachet that he got from his independent film to be like, it got him in the room. And once he was in the room, he was just like, oh, no, I've got the way. I know how I want to make this. And so that's the other thing. I mean, like, I think that there are directors that definitely have that. I mean, I think that that's what happened also to an extent with Colin Trevorrow, is because he had Safety Not Guaranteed, and I think that he basically had a take with what they could do with Jurassic World. And I guarantee you one of the main plot points of that movie was something he brought to the table. And he was just like, it could have been he's training velociraptors. Like,
sure.
It all it takes is something like that. And then the studio just starts jerking. I mean, they all just start circle jerking in the room.
Well, no, and I think that's a really interesting point. Not the jerking off in the room, but the other side of that point.
But Gareth Edwards, I mean, that was his whole thing. Is he said the reason he got the Godzilla job is because he was basically trying to, when he was pitching it, when he was talking with the studio execs about it, he said, imagine what it would really like. We all seen Godzilla movies. Yeah, guy in a rubber suit. He was like, imagine the scale. Imagine if you were on the ground and one of this creature, this mythologically big creature, was rumbling through your city, and what that would actually look like. What would the scale of that feel like? And then he's like, that's what I want to bring to it, is I want to bring this type of like realism to it and ground it with these characters that are in the midst of this huge ecological event.
He was 6 years too late because
2012 had already come out.
No, how dare you bring up that movie in this room? I haven't seen you in months and you bring up 2012. God,
my wife's favorite movie.
The only thing worse than the actual year 2020 is the movie 2012.
There's something we can agree on.
No, I was gonna say, and it is another one that is on my list, is Matt Reeves, who directs Cloverfield in 2007.
Yep.
And Cloverfield, for me, was akin to the first Jurassic Park. It was the first time I left a movie theater. I went back home, and I believe I was out on my patio smoking a cigarette, and I looked up, I was in like an enclosed outside patio, and I looked up and I was like, oh shit, like what would I do right now if this giant creature, there were the only 2 movies at that point to me that gave scale to what an attack would be like for me. And it made me uncomfortable in that way. But, Matt Reeves, I think I didn't love, Godzilla for a few reasons, but part of it I do believe is because I really liked Cloverfield. Like I know there's not a lot of people that love that movie. I know you and I have talked about our shared love of that movie, but I think that movie for me absolutely is the first time I was put in the driver's seat of being in like an invasion. And like what that would be like, and what it would be like to just. What I love in that movie is they're not always the ones. Not until the very end are they the ones right in the monster's eye. They're always just like catching shit that's happening around the city to them with the monster out of the corner, and that is way scarier to me than like the money shots, because I'm just like for 2/3 of that movie, I don't understand what the shape of the creature looks like.
Yeah.
Because I can't figure out why it's like it's hitting this building and that building. And then when you get the idea that it's like, oh, it's kind of crawling, or it's not like Godzilla that like stands up and stomps on shit. It's like crawling through the city. That was terrifying to me.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's really interesting that they get those pitches, because that's what I always wonder with these directors and literally Marvel. I mean, I have an entire list that's Marvel movies that have done this. I know Ben and I watched John Watts' movie Cop Car, and that guy gets Spider-Man Homecoming. That does well. He gets the sequel and now any other sequels. And now he's like, and what's interesting also for a lot of these filmmakers is that once they hit it, if they're on a cycle with these movies, that's kind of what they do for the next decade of their life.
Yeah.
Like he gets, Spider-Man in 2016, and he's not going to be done with Spider-Man movies till 2026 probably at this point. I mean, so they're going well.
He might be able to do like a really small movie somewhere
Yes.
here or there, some sort of personal project. But yeah, for the most part, he's going to be, as long as he wants to do Spider-Man, he'll continue to do Spider-Man.
Which is, and that's kind of like a person that sort of did that model, but did it fairly well, depending on who you talk to, is Christopher Nolan, who was kind of someone as well that came off of 2 independent movies. Well, in a third if you count his first flick, but then gets Batman, and then proceeds to do a Batman movie, his own movie, Batman movie, his own movie, Batman movie, his own movie, to pretty good success, at least, whether or not you think quality is there on it. But yeah, I mean, literally Marvel's got, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say Ryan Coogler. He had Creed and Fruitvale Station before he got Black Panther, but still, it's pretty big. Taika Waititi with What We Do in the Shadows gets Thor Ragnarok. Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck did Captain Marvel. They were TV directors. Scott Derrickson had Exorcism of Emily Rose, and he gets Doctor Strange. The guy that directed Thor: The Dark World was a TV director that did a bunch of Game of Thrones and other shit. James Gunn does Guardians of the Galaxy, coming off of 3 kind of very small-ish indie movies. And then even the Russo brothers, which is also the most amazing one, who wound up shepherding the last stretch of the Marvel movies, they were TV directors. They did Arrested Development. They did Community.
Yeah.
Like all of these TV series. And then they get Captain America Winter Soldier, which is a fucking phenomenal spy movie. Which is why I also think those TV guys somehow, like, they understand genre very well. And I love that they came in and they did a straight up spy fucking movie.
Yeah.
And that earned them the clout to keep making.
Well, I mean,
movies.
you think about just the Marvel formula. I mean, it kind of started with Favreau, and Favreau had directed 2 movies at that point, both of which would be considered independent, I would say, to some extent. Now, Zathura...
Three.
Yeah.
If you count Maid.
Yeah.
Which you shouldn't, because it's not a very good movie.
Maid's... I mean, that was his first That
Yes.
was his directorial debut.
Yeah.
Small movie, not great, but...
Then follows up with Zathura. Wait, Zathura came before Elf, right? Or
yes.
Elf? Yeah.
Yes. So it was Zathura and then Elf, which are both studio movies.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. They're studio movies. Zathura is great. Elf is great. But, I mean, based off of those 2 movies, I mean, I guess Zathura probably more than Elf, but, like, are you really thinking Iron Man?
Yeah.
Like Iron Man? And he brought sort of a filmmaker sensibility to, the development and of Iron Man, and cast it perfectly. Worked with
and fought for that casting.
And fought for the casting, and then also fought to let kind of Robert Downey Jr. kind of let his freak flag fly, in that as well. So I think that
and that movie's amazing. I mean, really, something that is not talked about enough in that movie is how easily it could have tanked and failed when they were doing, because they had no script.
Right.
They were dealing with they had the writer's strike, and they had stuff. And literally, if you watch the interviews from back then, before like Marvel became so big that like they didn't talk about those stuff, like everyone in that movie talks about showing up to set not knowing what they were shooting that day. Like basically, I mean, like we didn't have a scene last night. I showed up on set and they gave me new pages that had been written literally in the last like 2 hours. And that's how they just did by the seat of their pants, which is, I think, something also that works really great for someone that's an indie director that's not like, so you couldn't have put like a seasoned director on Iron Man under that kind of duress of like lack of things going on and expect them to do something well, versus an indie director's like, yeah, I fucking know how to, I know how to shoot when I don't have a script. I know how to fucking improvise and do this shit.
Right. Yeah. Like I'll fly by the seat of my pants. I don't care.
Yeah. And I think that's what Marvel did that by accident at first. And then I think they bred that into these people that they brought in each time that are kind of like, hey, let's see what, and listen, like the one that hangs out there, like we said, is really Edgar Wright. It's the only one that just seemed to have two different. But one thing that I'm kind of curious on, Ben, or that makes sense to me when you're talking about this, is that everybody, no matter how artsy your first like movie is, or your festival movie is, or your auteur breakout, most filmmakers have a film geek inside them somewhere. Sure. And that's what's kind of, I think, what these bigger studios tap into. And I think where you nail it is the dude with Skull Island. Like, he's been thinking about a Kong movie in his head probably since he was a kid. Sure. And he does this other movie and no one puts two and two together. And he's like, well, yeah, I did my like artsy thing, and this had a message, and it had whatever it is. But like, I'm also really fucking into this thing. And I make it akin to you being like, I would imagine if you were offered Meg before Meg had come out, that would have been your like, I think that would be the one that would get you out of like the film festival circuit into like, no, I want to make a real Meg movie, and this is what it's going to be like.
That's an interesting one. I was always excited about the prospect of a Meg movie, but yeah.
I think everyone's got
John
their
Turtletop
thing.
beat me.
Yeah. John Turtletop. Well, okay, so that a better question then, since that's not it. What is your, I mean, other than Dark Tower, and I know that's a big one for you, but like, what is your fantasy property?
Well, for a long time it was Ghostbusters 3, but you know, that was the big one.
By the way, did you notice the new trap here in the Slimer?
Oh, very nice.
I've got a working trap up here, and I also have one of the
in time getting ready for Afterlife.
That's right. So I realized that even though the Ghostbusters 3 movie didn't come out this summer, the toys did, and no one was buying them, so they went for really cheap online. So I got a really nice Slimer, and I got a ghost trap, and I got a PKE meter that actually works pretty phenomenally well.
Nice.
I'm very impressed with. But anyway, yeah. So all right.
But I would say that would have been it in the past. If you had to say now, like right now, what's the biggest white whale out there? It would be the adaptation of a book called Replay.
Shit. I didn't even know this.
Yeah, it's by Ken Grimwood, who passed away in the 90s. But the book came out, I think, in '84. It's a book that has a very devout group of fans. And really, the plot of it is that a guy. It starts with a guy dying, and it's been done. This has been done many times since then. But not in the context. I think that Stephen King stole a lot from it, from 11/23. Yes. So essentially what happens is he dies, and he wakes up, and he's in his college dorm room, but he has all of the memory of his life. So he's back where he was, and he doesn't understand what's going on, but he basically starts replaying his life from that point in college. And so he has a knowledge of like who wins the World Series, like stuff like that. So he starts positioning himself in all of these different places to make money, to make himself successful or whatever. So you go through this permutation of his life where he basically kind of sets himself to have it all. Doesn't end up super happy, ends up dying at the exact same time. And then he wakes up, but it's like 3 days later from when he originally woke up. So he keeps replaying. He calls it replaying. But every time he replays, it starts exponentially. His life starts getting exponentially shorter and shorter and shorter.
I like that.
So he's essentially immortal, but like by his last replays, he's skipping like years. He knows he only has like 3 years of his life left to do. And so it's a very interesting concept, and it's very, 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 very interesting. But the interesting thing about it is what the actual plot of the movie is he realizes like halfway through his third replay, he goes, by the time he's in his third replay, he like becomes a recluse and like goes off into the woods and is like living off of nature. And like the one time he goes into town, he's like, hey, I'm going to go to a movie. I haven't been to a movie in like 10 years or whatever. Cause he like dies when he's 60, and he's like 18 or whatever. So at this point he wakes up when he's 20, or whatever. And he goes and does stuff, but then he goes and lives in the woods, and he goes to see a movie that he's never seen before. And he was just like, who the fuck made this movie? And it was like directed by Steven Spielberg, and like George Lucas, it was a producer on it, and like all of this stuff like that. And it was directed by this woman who he had never heard of, and like in his past permutations was just like, whatever. So he gets a meeting with her and then realizes that she's the only other replayer.
I'm always a sucker for that shit.
Yeah. And so it becomes kind of a love story, but one that's very tumultuous, because it's like these two people have essentially this incredible power, over a knowledge of, what happens, what doesn't happen, things that, go whatever. But the other thing that like that's really interesting is like when she starts replaying, she's 8 years old. So when they get to like the fourth time and he comes back, he's like 24, but she's only 13. But she remembers everything, whatever. And so like he's like calling her house, and the parents are just like, who the fuck are you? Like, this 24-year-old guy calling a 13-year-old. It's really like, it's got moments of like levity like that, which are obviously really funny, like once they're put into context. But it's a really well-structured book, because it makes it definitely like really humanizes the characters, and they understand, like, because at one point he's just like, I think he kills himself multiple times and then ends up just waking up, same thing, kind of a Groundhog Day, but he's replaying later each time. But it has some interesting stuff about like depression and mortality, and then also about like these people meet each other and then live like 3 lives together, and then they fucking hate each other,
Yeah,
and,
of course.
Yeah, and it's really it's almost like a vampire story in that way.
Yeah,
where it's like they've spent. It reminds me a lot of like some of the writing reminded me of Anne Rice, but it's such a great book. And I remember the first time I've read it 4 times, I think, and I remember the first time I read it, I was just like, fuck, like it was in high school, I think. It was recommended to me by somebody, and I was like, man, this guy, like this author really got it. And I looked him up, and this is in the late 90s, and he was already dead.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I was just like, well, maybe he's replaying.
Yeah, you're him, Ben. No, I was interested. I was going to ask if you were, when you were thinking of this like property, would you be like just taking the concept and writing your own story, or did you like what they did with the story?
I would stick exactly with the story, because like what he does is really like it's pretty interesting. I mean, because he goes back and forth. So like for example, like he goes through multiple iterations of this whatever, but there's this one woman who's just like this terrible person, but is like really sexy and like really does it for him or whatever. And for some reason he keeps going back to her, because he's just like, well, it's comfortable. And she's just like she's the type of person like he could just walk over and just be like, I have $100,000. Do you want to come to my hotel room? She was like, yep. Okay, fine. And then it's really interesting, like what it does with the characters and what it does with the storyline. But the reason why I was saying Stephen King steals a lot from it is because there's literally like certain like language that he lifts from replay and puts into that book. Something about like the obstinate past.
Interesting.
Which is literally a term that's thrown around a lot in replay, and it's used multiple times in that book too. Replay is relatively obscure, so I think that he kind of lifted the idea, because obviously in one of these, he wakes up in one of these things and he's like, yeah, I'm going to go kill Oswald.
Yeah.
And so or I'm going to turn in Oswald is what he does, as opposed to killing him, which is what the other one does.
Which I'm also, this is a very strange tangent on here, but I am fascinated that almost every time travel story somehow goes back to JFK far more often than it goes back to Hitler.
No, I know.
And I don't know. I don't really understand why that is. The other thing I was also thinking about when you were originally telling me the premise of this book is how useless I would be. Like, if I could go back twice, it would be a different story. But if I only went back once, how useless I would be at making money based on sports scores. I would have I just would not remember who won what Super Bowl or when.
But you would know to put seed money in Microsoft or Apple
I'd be good with some of those things, but the I would need one of the almanacs for me to be any good at any of the sports stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of like cases of these directors we're talking about. We talked a lot about the Marvel ones. Christopher Nolan, I think, was a big one. And then there's some that like I read a couple of lists as well that I just didn't quite agree with, like Darren Aronofsky. I don't know that, like, they were talking about Noah being like a huge studio film, but I don't know that it really
but you think about all of the movies he did before that.
Yeah.
He did Pi, he did Requiem for a Dream.
Black Swan I think is bigger than Noah, but that's my thing. Michel Gondry getting Green Hornet, that sort of fits, although he had a pretty good body of work there. One that's really interesting that actually ties into one that we talked about is Doug Liman. So Doug Liman's
a pretty good one because he did Swingers. And
he did Swingers and Go, and then he gets Born.
That's a good one.
And what's kind of interesting with Liman also is there has never been a Doug Liman movie that has not been in disarray.
And now he's doing Tom Cruise in space.
I will say there are just a few filmmakers I'm very interested in talking to, and oddly enough, Doug Liman is way high on my list because he has had tumultuous shoots on every single property he has worked on. Every single movie he's worked on has gotten to a point where everyone's been like, this movie is going to bomb. It's a mess. Everyone on set is uncomfortable. It's crazy. And then somehow, every time he delivers a movie that, while it may not be a giant success, it fucking works. And I don't know how that happens.
So you would say it's kind of like a cycle? Like live, die, repeat?
Yeah, which is a fucking phenomenally good movie.
That's called Edge of Tomorrow, by the way.
Yes, I know. Well, several different names on that one. But yeah, like, I am fascinated by that dude, that he just keeps getting into, whether it's that he's difficult. It sounds like...
Hey, hold it. I think that we need to do a directed by podcast for Doug Liman. Because really, it's pretty good.
It's a weird body of work, and it's a weird, I don't know. I think you're right. I'll hold that one on it. But yeah, he's every time I go to one of his movies, I'm just like, I fucking enjoyed that, and I've heard nothing but bad things about it.
Yeah,
until it came out. It's funny. Another Spider-Man guy, Mark Webb, does 500 Days of Summer, and that gets the Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield, which were not his fault,
and was just because of his last name.
Yeah, exactly. Now I have a question. Do you consider Soderbergh someone that belongs on this list?
No, because Soderbergh made so many independent films before he did like Ocean's 11 and all that sort of stuff. So.
And it's funny because I always think of like Out of Sight for me was my introduction to like what I thought was mainstream Soderbergh, but
yeah, but I mean that's still a relatively low budget movie. All things considered,
it's got George Clooney and J-Lo's butt in it. I don't know how you consider that low.
That was J-Lo before she was really a big thing.
That was her butt was a big thing, so it still worked out.
I cannot lie.
We'll close out on whatever with Ben's last words, but I do just want to add one of my favorite anecdotes that involves the movie Out of Sight, which, by the way, I think Out of Sight is one of the single best Elmore Leonard adaptations, even though it is very different, especially in the main character from the book. But Out of Sight is a hugely underrated movie. If you have not seen it, it's got an amazing cast of fucking every great character actor at that point at the height of their game, from Don Cheadle to Steve Zahn to fucking Albert Brooks, Clooney. Like it's just a phenomenal movie. But
That's great.
I saw that movie in the theater. I really loved it. I bought it on DVD when it came out. And I went over to a friend's house of mine, and I'm like, we're gonna watch Out of Sight. It's a fucking great movie. I'm super excited. And like my 3 friends know the movie, and my one friend is like thinks he knows it. So like he's like, oh, I can't. I've been wanting to see this movie. I'm so excited. So we put the movie on, and like 30 minutes into it, he's just like, I don't understand. And we're like, what do you not understand? He's like, I don't like when's the blind girl show up? And we're like, what? What are you talking about?
At First Sight.
He thought it was the movie At First Sight. And we were like, no, that's not. And then
It's
we're
the
like,
blind guy. It's Val Kilmer.
It's Val
God damn it, get it right.
it's Val Kilmer and what's her name? Mighty Aphrodite. Mia Sorvino.
Mia Sorvino, yeah.
But he had been the most excited out of all of us to watch the movie that he thought was At First Sight. And we were like, why did you want to see that so bad? He's like, I like Val Kilmer. I don't know. I thought it was. But he's like, when does that show up? And that was one of my favorite things.
That's great.
Movie wise. Did you have any others on your list?
Let's just leave on that.
Just leave it on that note.
Let's leave on At First Sight.
Listen, if you're ever gonna go watch a movie with the word sight in it, make sure that it is Out of Sight and not At First Sight. That's a little pointer from the new way for you. We thank you so much for listening. We'll be having some more frequent episodes, I assume, in person here. It's nice to have Ben back in the studio. Good to see you. And we'll have some more for you. We've got a couple backlogged episodes. We've got a couple that we're ready to record.
You won't believe who directed At First Sight, though.
Who?
Erwin Winkler. Do you know who Erwin Winkler is?
Henry Winkler's. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
I'll probably know when you say whatever it is.
Oh no. I mean, well, the movies he's directed aren't that great. Never mind. But he's produced a lot of movies. He produced The Irishman most recently. But he was Rocky. I mean, he produced Rocky. He produced. Oh yeah. I mean, look at all the movies he produced. Raging Bull. Rocky 3, The Right Stuff, Rocky 4.
Wait, hold on a second.
Goodfellas. I mean, he was like Scorsese's producer.
I just like that you went from Raging Bull to Rocky 3.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Arguably one of the worst Rocky movies.
I pity the fool.
He met Mr. T. Do you not know who you're talking about?
Yeah, no, he like produced all of Scorsese's movies. It's crazy.
That's kind of impressive. Other than The Irishman, because that's not a very good movie. Yeah, but anyway, everyone, thank you so much for listening to The New Way. We'll be back with episodes soon. Cheers.
Cheers.